Today's daf we're going to be learning is Nazir, daf Hey. This is the daf for Shabbat. We're going to start at the bottom of Nazir daf Dal. The Mishnah had said that a Nazir olam is someone who's a Nazir for an indefinite period of time. But if somebody's hair gets too long and they need to cut it, so they're allowed to. What we're going to try to figure out is, where does that come from? So the Gemara asks, 4 lines from the bottom of Dalet Amud Bet, Unazir olam hechaktiv. Where does it say that you can cut your hair at certain intervals? Again, you have to cut your hair, and then when you cut your hair, you bring all those sacrifices that a Nazir normally does at the end of his Nazirite time period. In this case, he's going to continue being a Nazir, or she's going to continue being a Nazir, but they take a break just to cut the hair, bring the sacrifices, and then continue. Did Tanya, the Braita says, we're going to have 3 opinions here. Rabbi Omer, Avshalom n.z.r shene'emar yihiye miketz 40 shana. Says by Avshalom, who rebelled against David, his father, after 40 years, Vayomar Avshalom el hamelech, Avshalom says to the king, Elchana v'ashalem et nidri asher nadarti l'Hashem b'Chevron. Says, I'm going to pay back the neder, the vow that I made to God in Chevron. Umegalech. So now this shows, we're going to figure this out right now. We're going to piece the pieces together. He's going to l'shalem et nidro. They assume it means that he's a Nazir, and he's going to go to fulfill his neder. Umegalech echad l'12 chodesh. And now we're going to see that he gets to cut his hair once a year. How do we get that? Shene'emar in a different verse and actually a different chapter, but relating also to Avshalom. The first was in chapter Tevvav, and this is the chapter before in Yud Dalet and Shmuel Bet. Yihiye miketz yamim liyamim, and it was after yamim liyamim, the days. We're going to explain what yamim is. V'yalit yamim. Okay, and by the way, the whole pasuk there is ubigalcho et rosho, when he shaved his head. That's why they assumed that it must be the neder he took was a Nazirite vow. V'yam miketz yamim liyamim asher yigalech, and every so often he would go and shave or cut his hair. Ki kavad alav gilchu. Because it was too much for him. He shaved it off, and then he weighed his hair. How do we know Yamim is once a year, every 12 months? Because we learn it from another section in the Torah. The Torah talks about if I sell different things from different places. So if I live in a walled city, and I sell a house in a walled city, the pasuk says, Ish ki yimkor beit Moshav Ir Choma, if you sell a house which is in a walled city, it says, V'aytagu ulato ad tom shnat mimkaro, you can redeem it, you can buy it back, and the owner has to sell it to you within the first year until the end of the year that you sold it. Yamim tiye gulato, which means the geula, the time of redeeming it, is yamim, which we explain to be a year, as we saw, until the end of the year. So Rebbe says, what do? We say gzera shava, yamim there. What's true for there? Yamim mibater choma, mahatam yud bech chodesh. Just like there, it's 12 months. Avkan yud bech chodesh. Also here, it's 12 months. Rabbeinu Horai Omer, second opinion, megalech echad l'shloshim yom. Avshalom actually shaved once a month. We don't know why he says this. We're only going to get to this later in the Gemara. Rabbi Yossi Omer megalech me'erev Shabbat le'erev Shabbat. He would do it once a week, every Friday afternoon. So now we have 3 opinions about what Avshalom did. Presumably, these are also 3 halachic opinions, although there's a bit of a debate about whether this is lahalacha or not. Okay, so whether it's really just a debate about what Avshalom did, or is this really the halacha for someone who takes on Nizirut forever? Can they shave their head once a week, once a month, or once a year? Very strange to say, really, that Rabbi Yossi thinks you could shave every week. That would be really not growing your hair at all. It's a little bit strange. Rabbi Yossi here in the Braita says, his proof by Avshalom, and again, that's why there's a bit of a debate about whether we learn from here to everyone else or not, but the proof by Avshalom is that's what king's sons did. Kings, by the way, would get haircuts every day. King's sons would do it once a week, and that's why he would get his hair. It was already too much for him after a week, and therefore he was allowed to shave. My time of derive. So now the question is, we're going to go one by one, these 3 opinions. What's the reason for Rebbe? Yalif mi batei rechoma, and we're going to raise a question here. Rebbe learns it from the batei rechoma, from these walled cities and selling property. But Rebbe, wasn't he the one who said, Da'amar ein yamim, sorry, who da'amar? He was the one who said, ein yamim chutim mishnayim. When it says yamim, it means two. And what it means is, now it's strange, what does it mean? Well, it means there's two parts of the pasuk. If you sell a house in a walled city, by tagu ulato, you can redeem it ad tom shnat min karo, until the end of the year. Yamim tiegulato means, well, you can't do it for the first 2 days after you sold it. So yamim here actually means 2 days, according to Rebbe. So if he is making this gzera shava, the word here, there, and the word appears there, and we're going to learn from one to the other, why wouldn't he say 2 days? Which would obviously be ridiculous, which is what the Gemara is going to say. To which they say, "Hai gzera shava mishum kovei gamir." It's all because his hair got too long. That's why we're making this gzera shava to explain. Ub'shnei yamim leika koved, and in 2 days, it wasn't too hard. What did it say by Avshalom? His hair was too long. He needed too heavy. He needed to shave it. So that obviously would not be relevant after 2 days. And therefore, since the verse, now it gets a little tricky, but since the verse by Batei Lechoma is relating both to the year, you have until the end of the year, and it says Yamim tu Yagulato, means you have to push it off by 2 days. You can't sell it the first 2 days. If we're going to compare any one of those numbers, it's going to be obviously the year. And therefore, we're comparing it to the year. And therefore, we conclude that it's 12 months, even according to Rebbe, who learns that Yamim by Batei Rechoma really means 2 days. Well, it also means a year. There's two elements. There's the beginning time and the end time. To which the Gemara says, but wait, ve'ema. And now they're going to suggest 3 other suggestions, places where the Torah says Yamim, and it doesn't mean Yamim, or the Navi. Dichti, vahi mikech natayim Yamim. First source, by Paro. When Paro has dreams, and he goes after 2 years after Yosef saved the Sar HaMashkim, and he went back to his job and he forgot about Yosef. Well, then it says after 2 years, Paro had a dream. So now it says Shnatayim Yamim. Yamim here goes with 2 years. So why wouldn't Yamim be 2 years? Maybe he can only shave once every 2 years. Danim Yamim she'eni mahem shanim, Yamim she'eni mahem shanim. When we make a gzera shava, you're always better off finding the word that's closest. So our word appears in the pasuk. It says miketz yamim liyamim. It doesn't say shnatayim yamim. It doesn't have any sort of descriptor of the days. So therefore, we're going to learn yamim that don't have the word shanim with them, don't relate to years at all, from yamim that don't have years associated with it, like the yamim in the Batei Rechoma, in the walled cities. But we're not going to learn it from the pasuk of Paro, where it had the word shanim, years, and shnatayim, how many years, next to it. Ve'ema, second option, shloshim yom, tichtiv ad chodesh yamim. This is when the Jews complained in the desert that they had no meat, and then God gave them for 30 days. So it says ad chodesh yamim, right? It was coming out of their ears and all that. Danim yamim she'eni mahem chodeshim, yamim she'eni mahem chodeshim. Well, that's because it says chodesh next to it. So again, we're going to learn the plain yamim from the plain yamim, and not yamim from a place where it says v'al yochiach zeh sheyesh yimot chodeshim, where it says chodesh yamim. Obviously not going to learn it from there. Ve'ema mehacha, third option. In the story of Yiftach's daughter, it says miyamim yamima. So there it says they would go at certain intervals during the year. And there they infer that there were 4 times during the year that they would go. Okay, the Torah, Nevi'im say, right? It says miyamim yamima telechna b'nai Yisrael l'tanot levayit Yiftach giladi. Okay, they would go there 4 times. Arba'at yamim b'shana. They would go yamim yamima, which actually sounds very similar to yamim liyamim. They would do it 4 times a year. So if they do it 4 times a year, take 12 months, divide by 4, you get 3 months. So why don't we learn it that it's a 3-month time period? That would be actually very logical. To which the Gemara is going to have 2 answers why we don't learn it from here. Tanim yamim she'eni mahem. Sorry, I'm confused. Okay, tanim yamim yamim. Ve'ein tanim yamim yamima. The word yamima appears in Shoftim, in the book of Shoftim there, by the daughter of Yiftach. But it doesn't say yamim. So yamim and yamima are 2 different words. They're similar, same root, but we're not going to learn that. If we have yamim, better to learn it from yamim than to learn it from yamima. Umay nafkamina. The Gemara says that's not really such a great answer. Like, who cares? Okay, and that's what naftamina usually means. What's the ramification? But in this case, it really means who cares? What's the difference? I'm going to show you. We have gzera shava that not only is it different yamim to yamima, it's way different than that. It's two different words entirely, and yet we make gzera shava. V'hatana debei Rabbi Yishmael. In the house of Rabbi Yishmael, they brought the following bright. This happens a lot in the Gemara, where they bring a gzera shava, and then they suggest, remember, what's a gzera shava? It's where one word appears in one place, the same word appears somewhere else. We're going to learn what's true for one to the other. Which is exactly what Rebbe did here. Yamim there is 12 months, Yamim here is 12 months. Now we say, but maybe there's a different one you could have learned. And then they always say, no, this word is closer to that word. And then they say, well, look, they always bring up this example, which comes up in leprosy of the house. V'shava kohen uba kohen. There's two periods. And in fact, if you look at the simple reading, it's very hard to understand what the ba kohen is. And there's a midrash halacha in it, which explains the basis for what we're going to say. This is not really in the simple reading of the text. The Shava Kohen is the first stage, where after the house is quarantined, the Kohen comes back. He finds out that the nega, the leprous mark that was there on the house, spread. He declares it mitzvah, a leprous house. And then there's all sorts of things you have to do: take out the stones, scrape off the lime, put it back, put limestone on, and then put the stone back in. So it describes the whole process, what you're supposed to do. The next stage is Uva HaKohen. And then it says, and the Kohen comes. Now, Shava Kohen is the Kohen went back. Ba Kohen, the Kohen comes. Okay, they're kind of similar, but they're different words for sure. And they say, Zohi Shiva, Zohi Bia. What's true for the Shiva is going to be true for the Bia. Now, there with the Bia, it's not clear, like I said, from the simple reading what it's referring to. But the Midrash Halacha says there that it must be referring to if the Kohen went back to the house after the 7 days had passed and the leprous mark hadn't spread. They quarantine it for 7 more days and then he comes back. And that's Uba Kohen. And then it doesn't say what he's supposed to do if he finds what he's supposed to do at that point. So then they explain what he's supposed to do at that point is exactly what he did. If it's spread at this point, then he has to do exactly what happened at the end of the first stage. So that's the gzera shava, where we take two totally different words and we learn from one to the other. To which the Gemara says, don't try to learn from there to yamim and yamima, because there they needed something to find. So they had to find something that was similar to it because they were stuck, right? We have this ubako and we don't have the details. We want to know what details. We're going to learn it from something that's as similar as we can get. But in the case of yamim and yamima, and we have yamim and yamim, better to learn yamim from yamim than to learn yamim from yamima. So when there is something similar to it, we're going to learn it from the one that's more similar. Some people say, here's going to be an alternative answer why we didn't learn it from yamima. I don't know if you thought of this when I said it, but how do you know that when they took the year and they went 4 times a year, that they went exactly at 3-month intervals? The number of different possibilities. Maybe they just went at 4 random times a year. Or maybe they went with a stretch of 4 months, and then they went with every 2 months, and then they went every 4 months, and then they went after 2 months. Could be not every, I didn't say that right. They went after 4 months, and then after 2 months, after 4 months, after 2 months. Maybe they wanted to avoid the rainy season, some people say, right? They didn't want to walk in the rain, so in the winter, they waited 4 months. In summer months, they went more frequently. So that's why we don't learn it from there, because who's to even to say that it means 3 months? So what we did so far is we took Rebbe's opinion. We saw 3 opinions about what intervals Avshalom shaved his hair. Rebbe said a year. He learned it from the Batei Rechoma, from the walled cities. And we suggested maybe, first we said, doesn't that contradict what he says about the walled cities? The Yamimi actually translates as 2 days. We dealt with that. Then we suggested, why didn't he learn it from Miketz Shnatayim Yamim, that it's 2 years? Why didn't we learn it from the month, Chodesh Yamim, by the Slav, and the meat that they complained about? And why don't we learn it from the Yamim Yamima that was every 3 months, to which we say maybe it's not every 3 months. And also we'd rather learn it from a similar word, which is Yamim to Yamim and not Yamim to Yamim. Okay, whereas the other cases we said it's without a descriptor. Okay, next. Rabbeinu Horai. We're going to bring Rabbeinu Horai just to explain where he gets to 30 days. He says, my time, well, what do they say? Where does he get this from? Kohanim are not allowed to leave their hair uncut for 30 days. This is when they're working in the temple. So just like there, it's because already it's not looking nice at that point. That's what we're going to say. It was the same thing with Avshalom. It was looking unkempt at that point, and therefore he needed to shave. So 30 days are learned from the Kohanim. We're going to see a lot of comparisons to Kohen and Nazir. This is one of them. Rabbi Yossi Omer Megalech me'erev Shabbat le'erev Shabbat. So now we're going to raise a question against Rabbi Yossi because it seems like a ridiculous opinion, which the Gemara is going to say, Ma'ika b'nei l'shara choli. Wait a minute. He was a Nazir. So if he's a son of a king and sons of kings shave or get haircuts once a week, well, then when he shaved his hair every week, he was no different than all his brothers, right? We're assuming you have to grow your hair longer. Something has to be a little bit different. So they try to come up with two possibilities of how he was different than them, very minor differences. If a holiday fell out in the middle of the week, his brothers, they would shave and he wouldn't because he was a Nazir. So he made that one difference, only Fridays. Alternatively, you could say to shave in the morning of Erev Shabbat, of Friday. They would shave then. He wouldn't do it until the afternoon. That's, again, pretty minor, just a difference of morning and afternoon. Anyway, these are possibilities. So now we've finished. We dealt with Rebbe and a number of questions against him. Then we dealt with Rabbi Nehorai just to explain the reasoning. And then we dealt with Rabbi Yossi and raised a question and brought two answers. Now we're going back to something that, for whatever reason, was still troubling them about those psukim, not relevant at all to the Nazir olam. What's the deal with those 40 years? We started with this pasuk of Avshalom. It said, and after 40 years, he went to the king, and he said, and that's when also he ends up rebelling against David. So it says, why 40 years? Like 40 years to what? So first of all, there's a bit of a problem. You would assume it meant 40 years that David was king, but David was king only 40 years, and it's clear he rebelled before that. So what do they answer? Rabbi Nehorai Omer Mishum Rabbi Yoshua, Leketz 40 shana sheshalu lahem melech. After 40 years, counting from the time that the people went to Shmuel and said, we want a king, and when they started that whole thing. So, and then they say, Tana, a Braita says, it was 10 years into the rule of Shmuel. He was the Navi at the time. It was 10 years into him being the Navi or the Shofet, the judge of the people. And that's when they asked for a king. And that's when Avshalom counted from. Why is this important? Commentaries all try to struggle with, so what? Some of the commentary, and why? Why is that when he rebelled specifically? Some people say that he had heard, he knew somehow that David was going to rule for 40 years, but he didn't know where to count it from, and he counted it incorrectly. Therefore, he counted it from when the people asked for a king, even though that really wasn't when he was supposed to count it from, and that was his mistake in thinking that he could rebel against David because it was the end of David's reign. This sounds very similar to, and you could see sometimes these commentaries borrow from another story. It seems borrowed from the Chet HaEgel, when the people sinned in the golden calf, they did the miscounted when Moshe was supposed to come down. By the way, it's also 40. So it's an interesting connection here. And maybe that's where they got that commentary from. Anyways, a bunch of other answers you can look if you like on your own. New Mishnah. Stam Nizirut Shloshim Yom. If I take upon myself to be a Nizirah, and I don't say how long, we assume 30 days. Minani, where do we get this from? I'm a Rav Matna, I'm a kadosh yihiye. Get it from the pasuk about the Nazir. It says he will be sanctified. The words yihiye in gematria, that means each letter has a numeric value. Yud is 10, Hey is 5, Yud Hey is 30. So yihiye b'gematria tlatin havi. It's 30. Barpadamal kineged Nazir n.z.r ha'amurim b'torah 30 chaser. He says, no, the root Nazir appears 29 times in the Torah. They say 30 minus 1. It's the way they often talk, like lashes. There's 40 minus 1. It's really 39. Also, the Lamed Tet Melachot, the 39 things that you can't do, work that you can't do on Shabbat. Also, It's 39, but it's called 40 minus 1. So here also it's 30 minus 1, which obviously raises the question, so why 30? It should be 29. And in fact, we're going to see that he actually holds 29, although we're going to change that a little bit. But right now, we think he holds 29 days, even though we were looking for an answer, where do you get 30 from? Why 29 and 30? Those are obvious. Hebrew months are either 29 days or 30 days. So also fits in very nicely, right? The smallest unit of something reasonable is a month. So it's either 29 or 30. If you look at how many times the root Nazir, n.z.r appears in the Torah, I didn't do it myself, but I did see that people write about this, which is, it appears actually 30 times and not 29. So why is this talking about that? 29 and not 30. So one of them they don't count because it says ki n.z.r something like that. n.z.r is a crown, and it doesn't mean Nazir from Nizirut, so they drop that one off the list. Now we're going to have a back and forth between them. We're going to ask Rav Matna, why doesn't he learn it from there? Now, by the way, the Rambam, who's a rationalist, in his Parish on the Mishnah says that Rav Matna didn't really learn it from Kadosh yihiye. Okay, it's not like we learn things from gematria. It's that he had a tradition. He even calls it halacha l'moshe Sinai. It's an old tradition that it's some Nazirut is 30 days, and therefore he connected, right? He connects it to a verse. Like it's cute, gematria, but it's not where he actually learned it from. But in any case, they questioned Rav Matna and said, why didn't you take it from the 29 times it was mentioned, the Nazir root source, the root? Amal, he could answer, Hahuli drasha. Some of them are needed for drashot, to teach us halachot. For example, miyayin v'shechar yazil, should keep yourself distance from wine and beer. Le'esur mitzvah kiyen rashut. The extra word yazir there comes to teach you not only wine that you want to just drink for pleasure, but even wine for a mitzvah. You might have thought, oh, Nazir, well, Kiddush, of course you could drink wine for Kiddush. No, you can't either. Ki aflilin dor neder Nazir hazil. This has two roots of Nazir in it. Nazir lehazil. What do they learn from the double language there? We learned this already in Indarim. Melamed shanizirut chala al nazirut. That means if I say hareini Nazir, I want to be a Nazir, I want to be a Nazir, and I say one right after the other, I actually am obligated to Naziruyot of, right, whatever the minimum time, whether it's 29 or 30 days. So what do we learn? The point is that all teaches us other halachot, and therefore they're not free for us to start counting them and saying, oh, from the fact that these all appear here, we can learn how many days a Nazir is going to be a Nazir. Ubar pada, so what's he going to answer to that? Doesn't he need them for those drashot? Amar lecha, we're now on Amud Bet, Bar Pada says, Rabba could answer, he wasn't there to answer, but he could say, Amar lecha means he could have said, Lekachad min hom de lav lidrasha. There were no words, let's put it this way, it can't possibly be that every single word is there for a reason. And therefore, Elamida hahula minyana, since there's at least one that's there as an extra, and you can count it, kulunami leminyana, all of those could be counted for this count. What he's basically saying, in other words, is normally we say you can't darshan two things from one pasuk. But if you're just doing a count of how many times that root appears, that doesn't contradict your ability or not enable you to darshan something else. You can darshan one thing, and then you can also count these all out. That works. Now we're going to start with a slew of questions. So that was a bit of a discussion, even though they weren't here anymore, Rav Matna and Bar Pada, but the Gemara kind of with a bit of a ping pong. Why doesn't Rav Matna use Bar Pada's pasuk? And then once we answer Rav Matna, what's Bar Pada going to answer to that? And then we finish that. Now we're going to start with a slew of questions. Two questions on Bar Pada, both from Mishnas. Then once we answer to Bar Pada, we're going to then raise a question from that source itself on Rav Matna. Within that, we're going to have another question on Rav Matna. Then we're going to go back to a question on Bar Pada, and we're going to end with a question as our daf ends in the middle of that last question. So Tnan, we're going to have first two questions against Bar Pada. Tnan, it says in our Mishnah, Stam nizirut shloshim yom. So if it's 30 days, Bishlama, obviously this works fine for Rav Matna. Ela le Bar Pada kashe, but to Bar Pada this doesn't really make any sense because he said 29. Amar lecha Bar Pada would answer, he says, since there's the 30th day where you shave and you bring your sacrifices, therefore they called it 30 days because it's really 29. And on the following day, you bring your sacrifices, you shave your hair, you bring your sacrifices. That's considered part of the whole, it's a package. including the last day, which is really not a day of Nizirut, it's just finishing up. But that's going to be problematic with this next Mishnah. Question number 2, Tanan, it says in the Mishnah, Mish Amal Hareini Nazir Migalech Yom 31. If you said I'm going to be a Nazir and you don't give any specific amount of any day, you shave on the 31st day. So you were saying it was all on the day 30, but this says 31. Rav Matna, this makes perfect sense. 30 days of Nizirut, day 31, you do your procedure. Barpada doesn't make any sense because you're already done on day 29. Barpada is going to answer like this. But look at the end of that Mishnah. It says, if you shaved on the 30th day, it works. Meaning, it could work. Why? Because 29 is really enough. So that clearly supports him because it really doesn't work to Rav Matna, because if 30 days you're supposed to be a Nazir, you're only supposed to shave on the 31st day. So how could it work if you do it on day 30? Reisha, so how does he explain the Reisha then? That you really, ideally, this is not ideal. If you did it on day 30, it works. But ideally, you're supposed to do it on day 31. How does that work according to Barpada, who said 29? Well, na'aseh ke'omer shlemi. He's now going to say, and the way the commentaries explain, it's hard to read this from just the words itself, na'aseh kishlemim, it's done as if they're whole, complete days. What he wants to say is like this. By the letter of the law, 29 is enough. You say, I'm going to be a Nazir, we assume 29 days. However, since many people round things off and do them as 30, so let's be strict and make you do 30. And how much of 30? 30 complete days, which means that you can only do your sacrifice on day number 31. So even though, while theoretically he thinks 29 is enough, in practice, we do 30. And then that makes perfect sense because you wait till the end of day 30 and only on day 31 do you do the procedure. But if you ended up doing it by accident on day 30, it's fine because the letter of the law is 29. That's Barpad. Obviously, from here, we're going to segue into a question on Rav Matna then. Because the Rav Matna Kasha Seifa, the part that says if you did it on day 30, how can that work according to Rav Matna? According to Rav Matna, you're a Nazir that day still. You can only do the sacrifice the next day. To which he answers, Kasavar, the Gemara answers, he must hold Miktsat Hayom Kikulo. That means part of the day is considered as if it was a whole day. We know this from Shiva, right? Any part of a day you did Shiva, both on the day of the burial and the day, right, as long as it was during daytime, and during the morning of the last day, that's considered like a complete day. So therefore, in the morning of the 30th day, you've already finished, so to speak, your Nizirut. You can actually, if you did the korban, you should wait till the next day. But if you did it, it's fine because Mitzad Yom Kikulo, part of the day is like the whole day. Okay, so that was 2 questions against Barpada from the Mishnah. We resolved them from Mishnayot, right? One was our Mishnah, one was different Mishnah. Then we threw that one back, that second Mishnah, as a question on Rav Matna. We resolved it. Now we have one last question on Barpada. And here the Gemara seems to be going back to the original Barpada that we thought he really only meant 29, even though the Gemara already explained that, well, in the end, we really do 30, but this is typical of the Gemara where the question ignores the answer we gave in the previous. So now we're back to thinking Barpada says just 29. So none, there's a Mishnah that says, Mishnah Zal, Shtei Nizirot, if you did 2 Nizirot, like we talked about the Nizirut Chala Nizirot, you said I'm going to be a Nazir, and then you said I'm going to be a Nazir, and you have now 2 time periods. Megalech et harishona yom 31, v'ashniya yom 61. You do the first one on the 31st day, which counts as, right, your 30 days are done. Your 31st day is already the first day of your new one, but you also do your sacrifice for your old one. And then you start counting again from day 31. So Ashniya Yom 61, and then after 30 days pass, then you do on the 61st day. So Bishlam ala Rav Matna Nicha, because it's 30 days, and then you do it on the day after. Barpada Kashya, but according to Barpada, you're going to have a problem because 29 should have been enough. Therefore, you should have done it on day 30, and then then at that point, if you, let's say, start on the next day or even start on that day, it would be even earlier. All you would need is 29 more days. So we're left with a question on Barpada. We'll see tomorrow on Sunday how they deal with it. Wishing everybody a Shabbat Shalom, a Shabbat Tov, and we'll meet up on Sunday.